Welcome, and thank you for joining LPG Talks Live. I'm André Pimentel, and I'm with ANOVA, the remote tank monitoring partner and industry council member of the World LPG Association. It is an honor and a pleasure to host the third edition in 2022 of the LPG Talks Live. Let me just remind you that this is a World LPG Association meeting and is therefore governed by the World LPG Association statutes, specifically our antitrust guidelines, which prohibits the discussion of commercial sensitive information such as pricing, volumes, market shares, etc. Today, our session is focused on the LPG's role in achieving the 17 Sustainable Development Goals defined in the United Nations 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. There are more than 1,000 applications of LPG, a clean burning fuel, which contributes to all the SDGs either directly or indirectly in a range of ways. Today, we'll be hearing and learning on how LPG contributes towards expediting the global achievement of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. We have had a lot of interest in this session, and so we thank you very much for signing up and tuning in today. Really appreciate it. And to kick off this session, I'm very happy to welcome James Rockwell, CEO and Managing Director of the World LPG Association. Welcome, James, and thank you so much for joining us.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Andre, for that introduction. And of course, thank you to ANOVA for hosting this series of LPG Talks Live. This webinar series, which today addresses the role of LPG in achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. Now, let me start by saying that the LPG industry is fully committed to meeting the challenges of climate change. The successful efforts that we've made over the past few years to develop low carbon, zero carbon, renewable LPG and similar molecules is, I think, really testament to our commitment. But our future must not be seen just through the important but rather narrow lens of climate change. Tomorrow's energy systems need also to deliver on all the real challenges facing the people of our planet today. Many of these challenges, such as improving health, ending poverty, reducing inequality, working to preserve our oceans and our forests, these are enshrined in 17 Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs. And these are the heart of the UN 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, something that's been adopted by every UN member state. Yet today, with all the complex and interconnected challenges and crises the world is facing, which is the COVID-19 pandemic, which is still not over, of course the climate crisis, the war in Ukraine, conflicts in general, and the impact this is having on energy pricing and energy security. Putting these together, the realization of the SDGs right now is very much at risk. And it's the most vulnerable people on our planet who are going to suffer if we fail. Now, if we want to keep the SDGs on track, we need to focus on pathways that not only reduce carbon emissions, but also conserve natural resources, that promote health, that advance the transition to a more inclusive and a just economy. I'm sure you've heard the expression, don't leave anybody behind. And that's, I think, very critical for our future energy systems. Now, LPG and renewable LPG can do this. We can contribute to actually all 17 of the sustainable goals as part of our contribution to a sustainable future. Now, the LPG contribution to each of the SDGs is very well documented. We've got numerous case studies which cover this, and we also have a working group of WLPG members that's focused exactly on this issue as part of our current strategic plan. Now, in the webinar today, the speakers are going to address some of the most important ways that LPG can support the SDGs, ranging from helping support the achievement of gender equality through freeing women and principally girl children from the drudgery of collecting firewood. We'll look at the health benefits of replacing polluting traditional fuels with LPG for cooking. We'll also look at the climate change improvements that LPG can bring today immediately with conventional LPG, but also the benefits tomorrow of the introduction of a low and zero carbon LPG, propane, and other similar molecules. But let us be in no doubt. We stand today on a precipice. We are at a critical moment. Either we fail to deliver on our commitments to support the world's most vulnerable, or preferably together, we reinvigorate our efforts to meet the SDGs and to deliver meaningful progress for people and the planet by 2030. LPG, renewable LPG, the companies and the people that are behind this exceptional energy, they stand ready to play their role as part of the solution to our future energy challenges. And if you want to get more involved in these important issues, then join us during the week of November the 14th in New Delhi at LPG Week, which is going to be held under the theme Humanizing Energy, which I think is clearly very relevant to the delivery on meeting these Sustainable Development Goals. LPG Week promises to be a massive moment, and make sure that you get there. With that, thank you very much. Enjoy the webinar, and Andre, I pass it back to you.
Thank you for your words, James. Before we move into our panel discussion, we would like to launch a poll to understand how is your organization performing against the Sustainable Development Goals. So on the Sustainable Development Goals, your organization's performance, is it excellently? Could it perform better? Or you do not have a SDG program? It's great to understand on how within the LPG industry that is joining today, and even those outside of the LPG industry, can let us know where we are in terms of an industry, in terms of the sum of our organizations, with regarding the performance of the SDGs. And so we have 30 on 30, 100%, and I think it's so we are on a 55%, sorry. Let's wait, give it a little bit more, a couple of seconds. Ideally we reach 60, so if you have not voted, please do so. We invite you to vote on how is your organization performing against the Sustainable Development Goals. 59, one more. There you go, 62. I think we can close it. And so currently 51% say they could perform better. It's a great sign that 11 out of the 62, 28% said that they are excellently performing on the SDGs. And we have an opportunity to improve on 8, not to have an SDG program. So for those of you, I would strongly advise to get in touch with the World LPG Association if you want to be part and help and also understand how other companies are defining the program and the goals and measure against that goal. So definitely would strongly encourage you to reach out. And thank you for that. It is now time to move to our panel discussion. And I would like to present Michael Kelly, Chief Advocacy Officer and Deputy Managing Director of the World LPG Association, who will be moderating the panel today. Welcome, Michael.
All right. Thank you very much, Andre. Thank you for that very capable introduction and for showing us that poll. Before we kick off in our discussion with the panel, we are going to have one more poll that's going to come up. I think you should be seeing it shortly. First, we're going to show you what the 17 different SDGs are. We're fortunate that the United Nations did create these wonderful infographics that are very attractive and give a very good idea of the different SDGs and allow the United Nations bodies and other stakeholders such as WPGA to communicate very effortlessly using these infographics. And you can see the poll in front of you. So having looked at the 17 different SDGs that exist, which SDGs or on which SDGs does your company focus? And you can see there, this is like a school test. It is multiple choice. So you can pick more than one if you think that your company is focusing on more of these SDGs. And we'll give you just a few minutes to work on this before we launch into the discussion with our panelists. I should point out, I guess, that probably the SDG most attached to the LPG industry is SDG 7. So the SDG which speaks about affordable and clean energy and access to affordable and clean energy. And obviously that's something that LPG is very, very tied to, particularly in developing countries. There we go. Okay. So yes, I mean, from what I'm seeing here, it's obviously SDG 7, which comes out ahead of many of the others. It's interesting that SDG 9, that focuses on industry, innovation, and infrastructure, is also coming out quite high. Is this being seen by everyone else, or is this just the? Yes. Okay. So anyway, it's interesting that LPG is having this effect on different areas. In terms of development, the issue of gender equality that we're going to hear about later in the discussion, infrastructure, and obviously SDG 7, which focuses on access to clean and affordable energy. But shifting gears, let's move into a discussion with our panel. And the first person I'm going to call on to give an opening statement, and then we're going to move into question and answers. And the way I want to do this is, if you have a question and you're a participant, you can either click on the hand button on your dashboard that allow you to ask a question. When I call on you, say what your name is, who you are, and what organization you represent, please. Or you can put a question into the Q&A box. Please use the Q&A box and not the chat box, because we're focusing the Q&A box on questions. And again, I'll see what your name is, but please let us know what organization you represent. It just helps us manage the discussion in a way which is more efficient and better. And it also maybe help us follow up. If there's any follow-up questions, we'll be able to contact you. So first up is Frank Rietdijk. And it took me a long time to learn how to pronounce that correctly, Frank, but I think I've got it down now. Frank Rietdijk from the Group Sustainability Manager from SHV Energy. He's also the chair of the WPGA's working group on the SDGs. And Frank, as part of your opening statement, I want you to address this question of how should companies that are new to the SDGs start working on the SDGs? If you could just incorporate that into your opening statement, please.
Sure. Thank you very much, Michael. And thanks everybody for joining this webinar. I think I need to say good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on which part of the world you're joining. My name is Frank Rietdijk. Michael did a really good job in pronouncing my last name. I'm from the Netherlands, and it's a pleasure to address the SDGs in this live webinar. So within SHV Energy, I'm the Group Sustainability Manager. I work for SHV Energy now for almost 6 years. And for more than 2 years within the WLPGA, I'm chairing the working group that looks into the contributions of LPG to the Sustainable Development Goals. Or I think better from now on, let's call them the SDGs. So if I want to start with my personal view on the SDGs, I think the SDGs are providing us a shared vision of the world. It's a vision piece of the globalization puzzle. And what's good about the SDGs? For me, I think the SDGs do a really good job in creating a common language, or maybe even better, a shared purpose. So each goal identifies specific targets, and I think that's very important. The SDGs itself, they have a title. It's very clear what they're about. But underneath, and I will come back to that later, there are very specific targets that you can address if you want to link those SDGs to your business strategy. So in adopting the SDGs, it's a very good means to showing your progress towards each of those targets. So within the working group of the WLPGA, we have been working on a few things that I would like to point out. So first, back in 2019, we drafted a report title was The Contributions of LPG to the Sustainable Development Goals. And I think that was a very important report because in this report, we introduced a priority model. So in that model, we show that LPG contributes directly to many of the SDGs. And as also James just pointed out, at least indirectly to all of them. And in pointing out the direct contributions of LPG to the SDGs, this report focuses particularly on the key contributions of LPG towards 7 of the SDGs. So again, in my view, the most powerful thing about the SDGs is that they share an overarching view of mankind's most important challenges. And to me, that's very important because maybe what's not a challenge in a developed country might still be a very significant challenge in developing countries. A few examples. For instance, using LPG as clean cooking fuel, which is the largest use of LPG in developing countries, makes obvious contributions towards SDG number 7, which is affordable and clean energy. And I'm sure that Joy will tell us much more about this in her opening statement. Another example is LPG as an autogas. So as James also pointed out, climate change is very important, but also if you look into the use of autogas, it helps us to have cleaner air in many of the cities where it's being used. Because of this, it also contributes to SDG number 3, which is good health and well-being, and also SDG number 11, sustainable cities and communities. And finally, as I already pointed out, SDG number 13, which is climate action, is very important. The topic of climate change adds up to a planetary emergency that includes loss of life. These days, I think very prominently in the news, social and geopolitical tensions, but also very clearly negative economic impacts. But also coming back to James' words, still scientists agree that there's a window of change as long as we act now and act fast.
All right, thank you.
And just very briefly, after publishing the report, we also did another project, which are the impact stories. So when we update on SDGs, of course, it's about words, it's about figures, but I think what we need is proof points. So these are real projects and cases that involve real people. So with these impact stories, we adopted a people-centric approach. It's a website that you can visit. I invite all of the WLPG members to share impact stories with us, so we can use them also in this website. And I think this is what good communications and also the Sustainable Development Goals are all about. It's about being relevant and being relatable. And I think the first and foremost step in adopting the SDGs, coming back to your point, Michael, is let's first start understanding the SDGs. I see in the poll that a few people didn't look into SDGs and linked it to their business strategy. And there are very good websites. The one that I really like to use is the SDG Compass that you can look into. And I think that's a very good step in starting looking into the SDGs. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much, Frank. I really like what you said. SDGs creates a common language. I think that's a wonderful way to think about the SDGs and the benefit that they provide to those of us who are thinking about how to incorporate these into our businesses. And you said that the website you like is the SDGs Compass. Is that correct?
That's correct. You can, it shares a first overview, and then you can click on all of the SDGs to find out more information, for instance, about the key indicators underneath.
Excellent. All right, thank you. So SDGs Compass, and we'll try and put this information into the notes under, following the webinar, so it's available for everyone. Thank you, Frank. Switching gears, we are going to hear now from Kano Priya Singh. She is a senior manager of LPG and S&D at Indian Oil Corporation. I should point out that Indian Oil Corporation was the spearhead of this massive switching program that India has been through over the last 5 or 6 years, where they converted, I don't even know what the numbers are anymore, 800 million people, I think, to where 90+% of all Indians cook on LPG. It's been an unprecedented and by far the largest switching program in history. Kanu is also a member of the WPGA Youth Council, so the body that we set up to try and bring younger and more diverse voices into our management and into our industry, so that our industry can reflect the concerns of younger people. Kanu, please, your opening statement.
Thanks, Michael. So yeah, India is one of the largest market of LPG. And as Frank said, most of this LPG is being used as a household fuel. But with a population of 1 billion and counting, it's not an easy task for India to ensure that everyone have access to clean and affordable fuel like LPG. LPG industry in India have taken up that task, and we have been living up to the challenge. But one thing that I in particular am proud of is how LPG industry is helping inching our country towards being a more sustainable community, which is one of our sustainability goals. We have more than 1,000 of automotive fuel stations which gives LPG for vehicles. We have more than 190 bottling plants, thousands of kilometers of LPG pipelines catering to these bottling plants. All of which means that there is an increased usage of LPG, right from household fuels to automotive fuels to industrial fuels, which leads to reduced adverse per capita environmental impact of these cities and communities. So LPG together is actually building sustainable cities and communities. Now, one more sustainability development goals, which Indian Oil Corporation, my company that I work with, is actively working towards, is that to reduce socioeconomic inequalities and to create these vibrant economies, we promote diversity within our supply chain. Like my company, for example, provides reservations to vulnerable and marginalized stakeholders, to minorities, as well as special focus on women candidates in selection of our LPG distributorships. This has helped encourage women entrepreneurs to become Indian Oil's business partners, which makes them independent, enabling them to contribute positively to the society. Now, studies have shown that greater gender equality, which again is one of the SDG, it boosts economic growth, it's lead to better development outcomes, and it also contributes to income inequality and boosting economic diversification, which supports economic resilience.
Excellent. Thank you, Kanu. Uh, can I just ask as a follow-up? I mean, you mentioned the amount of infrastructure which has been put in India over the last few years. It's been an incredible amount. And from these key projects, the LPG industry is undertaking this charge to not only improve the quality of life of the people that are getting LPG, so it's people around cities and in rural areas. But what other projects outside of domestic consumption is the industry looking at? Because I know that my understanding is that they've gotten to a level of almost saturation for domestic consumption in India, and they're starting to look at other uses of LPG. Can you inform us of some of the things your industry is doing?
So before I jump to the usage other than domestic, I should mention that the 800 million household connections that you were talking about earlier, which is under a scheme called PMUY. The scheme is a social welfare scheme, which basically has a tagline which says clean fuels leads to a better life. This was aimed to enhance LPG usage in rural areas by giving more concessional connections to downtrodden. We also had a scheme which was specifically meant for people from economically backward section, which were hard hit during COVID era. And Indian Oil itself has given almost 6.6 crores of LPG refills to our customers. But all of this was towards the household fuels. The Other than household, we are ensuring that ease of accessibility of LPG would means that it would increase industrialization in far-flung areas. Now, we have these different categories of LPG distributors. Uh, Urban areas, yes, rural areas are there, but we have places which are hard to reach, far-flung places. And what happens in such places is that once you have easy and affordable clean fuel, small businesses, for example, like an eatery or a small hotel or a small restaurants, which now has a smooth supply of LPG, they started attracting demand. And this leads to that rural area uh, gets to more industrialized, and which leads to better chances of better incomes, and thus reduces more economic inequalities.
Hmm. Now,
This,
very interesting,
but
very interesting. And I think you're talking about SDG 8, which is decent work and economic growth, SDG 9, which is industry, innovation, infrastructure, and even to a certain extent, SDG 11, sustainable cities and communities, all of them being impacted by LPG.
But being a developing country, most of our focus has been to ensure that LPG as a household fuel is available to everyone, because it not only helps in a climate action or being a sustainable community. In India, for particular, it would means that it's a general health and well-being of 70% of our population, which is in rural. When we are providing clean and accessible energy to a rural household, it basically means that the housemaker, which is a woman, is able to give more time to their family, is able to take care of their kids. They are not going out to collect wood. There has been substantial decrease in number of uh, people falling sick because of burning wood. So all of this has been contributing towards the overall general well-being of the population.
Yeah, excellent. Well said. Thank you very much, Kanma. That's a very powerful statement. And moving from a very large and very populated country in Asia to a very large and very populated country in sub-Saharan Africa. And we're going to hear from Joy Sheyan, who is the founder of Arcus 360. She's also the coordinator of Women in LPG in Nigeria. And Joy, you are one of the busiest people I know. I know you have your fingers in so many other pies. I think sometimes that there's two of you because you've got such a big workload. But Joy, why don't you give us your opening statement?
Thank you so much, Michael. And you're very correct that I'm quite a busy person. Just yesterday, I was on a panel talking about gender inequality. And one of the panelists actually just gave an example that I needed to respond to. And in that example, he was saying that in his class 30 years ago, there were just 6 people studying geology in the university. And so women are not in the pool, that's why they don't get the jobs. And I have to just jump in to say, look, 30 years ago in Nigeria, it wasn't fashionable to send women to university. They just thought it was a waste of time. So if you don't give women equal opportunities as you give men, you probably won't find them in your class because they weren't allowed to go to school anyway. So I think I'll just start from the back, which is talking about reduced inequalities. That's SDG 10. And I like to start there because I think that if we work our way backwards from reduced inequalities, there is an interaction that it has with gender equality and how that then has a ripple effect on good health and well-being. And I say that because, for example, if you were going to do an intervention in a rural area and you don't account for all of the kinds of people you would find in that rural area, what would happen is that you get to leave somebody behind, thereby widening the inequality that is there. So I think that very critically, we need to look at how these SDGs interact with one another. So we're not focusing on one, but because one is not getting the attention that it should, it's actually slowing down the work of the other interventions that happen. And from that example that I gave, if you're giving out subsidies and you don't make account for people who don't have bank accounts, they're not going to get the subsidy and they're not going to buy the fuel. And the example I would always give, especially for women, is when a man can wake up in a rural area, dress up and then head out. Oh, I'm going to work, I'm going to the farm, I'm going somewhere. But the woman doesn't have that the same opportunity. She has to go get firewood. She has to make sure the firewood is dry and then prepare the food before the children can eat and go to school. So imagine how much time has been wasted just because she's a woman. We need to ensure that time, which is the most important resource in the context of gender equality, is being allocated where it should. As we all know, women represent 50% of the world's population. If 50% of the world's population are not given the opportunity to make contribution, to make positive impact, it means that we're only operating at 50% at best. So a woman who can now reallocate her time, she can use the time to pursue something else, or a trade, or even leisure, which brings me to the third SDG, which is about good health and well-being. And I'm just going to share a quick story about one woman who was brought to the network. She had been having eye problems from her doctor, and the doctor actually said to her, look, you need to stop using firewood, otherwise you're going to go blind. And what really excited us about that example is the fact that each time we interact with these women, we're telling them from abstract literature or studies, but this time we actually have this person right here in our midst, and we had to provide her with the LPG, with an LPG burner and the training to use it. But we plan to do a documentary around that, where she can come and give her own testimonial to say, this is how the use of LPG has positively impacted on my own good health, on my well-being, even if it's from the medical perspective. So just so that I don't go on and on forever, I'll just stop here.
Right. Thank you, Joy. No, thank you. It's always good to hear from you. And it's amazing what's happening in Nigeria with the growth of, or the expansion of LPG. We're starting to really see a market that had for a long time has had a lot of potential, finally starting to achieve that potential. You did say something which I thought was great, that time is the most important resource in gender equality. I think that's something we can maybe all take to heart. And Joy, I do have a question for you about the WIN LPG. As I mentioned, Women LPG was launched by the WLPGA in 2015 or 16. We realized that in many countries around the world, the people who purchase and use our fuel every day, you know, up to 75, 85, 80, 90% of those people are women. And that same percentage of people that make decisions about the industry, so 75, 80, 85, 90, 95% of the people making decisions about the industry were men. And so we wanted to bring more women into every level of the LPG industry operations, the executive boards, the administration, to ensure that our industry is more responsive. And we've set up chapters around the world. I think we have 9 chapters around the world. The Nigerian chapter of WIN LPG is one of the most active ones that we have. And Joy, I just wanted to ask, what sub goals are WIN LPG contributing to the programs that you've created? What objectives of the SDGs are you contributing to?
So a lot of the work that we do is around advocacy and sensitization, because we find that, like Kanu was saying, the women are on one end of the divide, and then the fuel is on the other end. Sometimes when you interact with them and you say, oh, when you hear about gas or LPG, what comes to your mind? And some of them say, oh, I think of an explosion.
Mm.
There's a lot of work to be done in terms of advocacy, in terms of letting them understand this feel. Sometimes they even say, oh, I prefer charcoal because it's cheaper. I can just take the quantity I want and use it per time. And we tell them that, look, in terms of the weight and the calorific value that it brings, it's not cheaper. More so, it is taken away from your health, albeit very slowly. So we're doing a lot of work in terms of advocacy, and that sort of ties into the national gas expansion plan that the federal government is doing. We've had the very rare opportunity to work with the federal government on that project, and up until this time, we've been to about 9 states, working with the state governments and all of the parastatals within the government to bring an awareness. And the message has been gender mainstreaming. How can we make use of the women that we have, the women power that we have to drive economic growth? So we have that working with the federal government, and then we have various initiatives that we launch from time to time. Just last year, we did a free program. It was an online program on the National Youth Day. And what we were trying to tell them, or what we're communicating from that program was, look, you don't need millions of naira or millions of dollars to come into the industry. For as low as 100,000 naira, which is less than $200, you can become someone who converts a diesel generator into an LPG generator. You can become a cylinder exchange agent, because we find that the youth potential that we have, they're just lying fallow. As I speak to you, the universities are on strike. So we want them to introduce LPG to them at an early age, and from a perspective of knowledge and financial independence.
Excellent. All right, thank you, Joy. Very good answer. And interesting also bringing youth into the discussion and getting them to know the LPG industry. So you talked about technology, and I think it's a great lead into our next speaker, who is Nick Quintong, who's the CEO and the co-founder of Pago Energy. I mean, Joy had mentioned also purchasing charcoal in small amounts. Pago Energy in Kenya has pioneered one of these this technology that allows people to purchase small amounts of LPG using M-Pesa, which is a kind of tax credit money. Maybe you can explain better what that is, Nick. But Nick, you've been managing this company. I think we first met, it was in 2014, I think, or something like that, down in Nairobi. And you've been leading this company and getting this technology up and running. And I have to say that the global LPG industry is paying attention. A lot of players in the LPG industry see this as a potential technology that could unlock the bottom of the pyramid in many different countries around the world. So Nick, over to you for your statement.
Thank you, Michael. Yeah, thanks for some background. So Pago, our mission is to unlock clean energy for the next billion. It's very much aligned with SDG 7, but like a lot of the other panelists, we see many other impacts and other SDGs that getting LPG to low-income segments or more vulnerable populations could be possible. At Pago, we focus a lot on what Joy just mentioned, which is that customers perceive LPG as being too expensive and trying to provide it in small amounts they can afford, similar to charcoal or kerosene. And we see the impact of LPG being far greater in the near term than a lot of other cooking energies that are available today. It's ready to scale. It's easy to move into more rural off-grid locations. You can pack a lot of energy into a cylinder. And so, we see ourselves as a technology provider that kind of helps enable the proliferation of LPG and all of its benefits. From an SDG perspective, we also see the great impact that it can have for climate and health. On the climate side, when you go after developing markets, you're usually displacing charcoal and wood, and there's a huge impact and I think opportunity for the industry to look at on the climate side. We're starting our own carbon program at Pago, and we're seeing an offset of about 2.7 tons per household being possible on an annual basis. This could lead to significant carbon revenue for LPG companies that can capture this and allow them to actually go much deeper into the market. So we see that as a huge benefit. Then also, obviously, on the health side, we've seen the impact in a place like Kenya, where currently only 30% of the population uses LPG. The other 70% is using dirty fuels. There's huge negative health impacts of cooking with dirty fuels. And if we're able to find a way to displace those with LPG, there's a huge impact as well. So it's a big part of who we are at Pago to go after this kind of impacts. It's the reason why we're so excited about this business and really excited about the focus of the LPG industry on the SDGs kind of moving forward.
Thanks, Nick. Did you say you're working on a carbon program for LPG? Can you tell us a little bit about that project? Because it's something the industry has been looking at and dancing around for a long time. No other business that I know of in the WPGA's membership has really cracked this.
Yeah, I think it's a huge opportunity for the industry. I think there's been, to be frank, I feel we've been a little bit on our back foot as a fossil fuel, that we feel that we don't have something to say on the climate side, and our impact is actually huge. For a household that's using charcoal, wood or kerosene, to replace that with a clean burning fuel like LPG has a huge impact on climate. There are existing methodologies out there for LPG specifically. So there's one it's called RECH 4.0 or RECH 4.0 that people can look up. There's also a new methodology focused on metered or monitored clean cooking fuel, both through Gold Standard. These provide a great incentive for LPG companies to go after bottom of the pyramid customers, because the greater climate impact is to go after customers that are cooking with dirty fuels, compared to obviously replacing a customer that with a different kind of LPG provider. So you're really going after this kind of replacement of a dirty fuel with LPG. So it's very much possible. I also think that LPG has an additional benefit. Previously, the majority in the clean cooking space and kind of carbon offsets that were available were within the improved cook stove space, where you're basically trying to get someone to have a more efficient cook stove and use less charcoal, as an example. With a monitored LPG product, you're able to kind of real time see how much the household's using and consuming of LPG, back end using the methodology around the offset. And so they can do monitoring and verification for carbon offsets in a way that wasn't really possible before. So I think it's a really exciting opportunity. I think the LPG industry should definitely be getting involved, and yeah, I'd be happy to chat with anyone that's interested in trying to build a program.
Yeah, absolutely. I can imagine that there are, in big countries like Nigeria or India, where you have large populations switching over, the opportunity for carbon credits must be something that everyone's going to be interested in at some point. I see a lot of nodding going on around the panel. I can't see any of the members of the audience, but I'm sure many of you are nodding as well. But this is something for us to watch as an industry. Right. Frank, I'm going to shoot a question your way. We got a question from the audience from William Kroll. And he wanted to know, from your opinion, how can technology help the industry support this sustainable development goals? And I think we've touched on that in some of the discussion that we've had, but if you want to expand on that particular question.
Yeah, sure. It's a great question, by the way. And I do think technology is key in reaching the targets that, of course, are in front of us. On the other hand, I also think that we shouldn't rely only on technologies, because that's also something what you hear, like technology will solve everything. Because I think the other thing we should put next to it is our own behavior. And maybe a very, very practical example, if I'm in a meeting room now, the light is on. When I leave the meeting room, of course, for saving energy consumption, it's good that the light is switched off. I can do it because I can switch a button. It's my own behavior. I'm conscious. So I leave the room and I switch the button. On the other hand, of course, there's technology. So there's also motion detectors. When I leave, I don't have to think of anything at all. I leave and it's switched off automatically. So I think this is just two very practical examples. Again, technology will solve many things, but I think we should also find, reaching our goals really in behavior and making people more conscious how they can reduce energy consumption and with that CO2 emissions.
Joy, I see you nodding. Is there anything you want to add to this? You're muted.
I totally agree with him in the sense that everyone needs to have a consciousness and beyond technology, because there are places where technology can reach. Like Kanu was saying, that the rural population is actually higher than the urban population. So they don't have that technology that can turn off a switch. It has to be imbibed. It has to be a part of the person. So yes, Frank, I totally agree with you.
Okay. All right. If there are any other questions from our members, make sure that you put them in the Q&A box and make sure you include which organization you represent. I'm going to have one more question for Kanu. Kanu, for such a large country like India, how is it ensured that LPG can actually be accessible to all? And how is it that increasing the accessibility of LPG will impact more SDGs than the others. So the question, I guess, is how did India expand LPG to the point it's at? I mean, it's topographically a complicated country. It's a big country. It's a huge population. What do you think are the lessons that other countries can learn from the Indian experience?
Oh yes, and there's like it's not just a geographically large country. We are so diverse, like from snow-peak mountain to desert to uh, forest to beaches to islands. We have everything. So see how we started with was we started building a network. We ensured that LPG is first and foremost accessible to everyone. And I have already talked about what kind of a supply chain we have, the bottling plants, the LPG distributors, and the pipeline. But lately, in the last 10 years, what we started doing is we had the network. We have LPG bottling plant. We started automizing our LPG bottling plant so that the supplies are smooth. Frank and Joy were talking about technology. We had used technology in our bottling plants to ensure that in minimal time, more and more cylinders are being filled. Like we have electronic carousels for filling cylinders. We have automated leak detecting machines. We have automatic wall changing machines or weight correction units. But apart from this, we have started focusing more on making sure that how easy it is for customer to access a cylinder. For example, there was a time, 15, 20 years back, booking of a cylinder was a very difficult task. You have to call up on the landline. Internet was not a thing. And if the other person is not going to pick up your call, you won't be able to book a cylinder.
Yeah.
Now we are at a time, you can just open the internet, go on a particular forum and one of the apps, and you can book a cylinder. In India, we have pioneered a technology where if you just give a missed call, we
Oh, it's kind of stopped there. She froze. We'll wait for her to come back. In the meantime, we are starting to receive a number of different questions in the question box and in the chats. David Tyler, I know you're on. You had a question for Nick Quinton. It had to do, can you unmute yourself and ask that question, David? Oh, here it is. How do you suggest that the LPG industry engage with ECH2O? It looks like an interesting concept.
I'm embarrassed to say, Michael, I'm not actually familiar with ECH2O. Maybe David could provide some more background. It's called something else.
I'm not embarrassed to say that I don't know what an ECH2O is either. So David, you got to either give us a bit more or a bit more information, or we're not going to be able to ask your question. But we will turn our attention to a question which came through from an anonymous attendee. And please, when you do ask a question, let us know who you are, so we don't know who this question is coming from. But it asks, what are the prospects globally for LPG from sustainable sources versus fossil, or what we now call conventional LPG? Frank, maybe I'll kick this one to you first, because I know that SHV Energy is making some investments in various types of renewable fuels, renewable LPG, renewable DME, and others. What do you think the prospects are in the long term? And then following that, Nick, I know that you've been talking a little bit about doing some work on bio LPG in Kenya. So Frank, if you could start us off.
Yeah, maybe first, I think it's a very interesting domain in the energy landscape. What we clearly see in SHV Energy is also when we did our engagement with stakeholders, where we actually designed our sustainability agenda. It was about air quality emissions and greenhouse gas emissions. And now we really see with the domain of sustainable sources and new feedstocks, it's also about deforestation and biodiversity. Because in those feedstocks, there's of course the discussion on first and second generation feedstocks. Like first generation, those are also crops that we use for feeding. And the second generation, you move away from those crops, and it's crops that are used cooking oil, crops that are not used for feeding. And of course, that is, I think, a very important discussion. Still, in many of these crops, there's also demand from other industries, like from the medical industries. It's also from the cosmetics industries with palm oil, for instance. And you already mentioned RDME. So in SH2 Energy, we sell bio-LPG, where biodiversity is a very important topic. And with selling RDME, which is another molecule that's very similar to LPG, we actually move away from that feedstock discussion because the feedstocks are waste products from many other industries. So instead of jumping on something where other people see controversies, they say, hey, let's use those feedstocks for the right purposes, which is not in all cases maybe producing bio-LPG. We actually move to feedstocks where a lot of industries want to get rid of those feedstocks. So we actually get paid to get rid of the feedstocks, and we use that same feedstock to produce RDME, which is a burning fuel. So I think that's where we are today, but I think that's also at the same time where we're heading for in the future, that the feedstock discussion is the most important discussion around it. And let's move towards feedstocks where we don't have controversies around, where we can actually help other companies and industry to get rid of those feedstocks.
Yeah, it is true. With some bio products, there is controversy over land use, over using arable land that was growing food for certain populations and moving those to crops that are being used for fuels. I think this is going to be particularly acute as we're starting to face some food challenges with the grain, all the grains being blocked in the Ukrainian crisis. And that's particularly acute, I think, in North Africa and in other countries that are largely dependent on Ukrainian grain. Nick, you mentioned that Kenya is taking its first steps towards looking at forms of bio-LPG in that market. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, thanks, Michael. I think it's very initial, right? I think the Global LPGA did a great report to kind of look at the efficacy of doing bio-LPG in a few different markets in sub-Saharan Africa. Kenya was one of them. To Frank's point, I think the kind of focus has been really on the cost and availability of feedstocks and the right feedstocks to kind of match the technology needed to produce local bio-LPG. I find it particularly interesting in Kenya because we have other impacts potentially by something a bio-LPG plant that could be very positive. There are issues with sanitation and municipal waste that companies like Sanergy are trying to work on. They're trying to find ways to set up the right kind of sanitation systems. And a lot of that is built around figuring out kind of the processing of those wastes and also kind of the economics of that. And so bio-LPG potentially could be used some of that as a feedstock. It could help support kind of removal of some of this waste, and then also provide kind of an economic incentive for it as well. So at PEGO, we find it to be really interesting, and we've been starting to have conversations in Kenya with different folks, kind of put a consortium together to investigate it further. So I think potentially a large impact. And again, the challenge is going to be around the cost of feedstocks, the potential tipping fee, and then again, the production scale. That I think the scale that we're looking at for initial plant, could maybe handle a couple 100,000 households compared to a country of 50 million people. So we have to figure out how to get up to real production scale. But again, initially the impacts look really great, and just beyond the LPG side, probably on the feedstock side could be a big impact as well.
Yeah, those the renewable LPG, bio-LPG in developing countries that have big agricultural sectors could one day be a big security supply issue. So you can produce in country, you're less dependent on imports. And that could be something that's interesting. Guys, I'm conscious of the time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask each of you to give us a final thoughts in 2 minutes, starting with Joy. You look like you want to give us some final thoughts, Joy.
Well, I would like to say it's been an engaging afternoon. We here in Nigeria, we haven't scratched the surface yet. And I can't wait. When Kanu was talking about where India is in terms of consumption, I just thought to myself, there's still so much work to be done. And the good thing is we have the benefit of people that have gone ahead of us. So I'm really looking forward to the technologies that Nick talked about, looking forward to getting some feelers and some heads up from Kanu. And the benefit of the World LPG Organization is I can always call Michael Kelly at any point in time. So well done, and look forward to discussions like this in the near future.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Joy. Kanu, your final thoughts, please.
Yeah, sorry, my Wi-Fi was wobbly, so I got cut off when I was answering the last thing. So yeah, India has done a lot when it comes to LPG, and I have seen that just ensuring that LPG is accessible has helped reach so many other sustainability development goals as well. So just one focus is actually automatically working on things like well-being, in reducing inequality, sustainable cities, climate action, clean fuel, and we have ensured that accessibility is there, but we are still working on mindset of percentage of our population to make sure that they continually use the LPG. So that is still a challenge, and we have been working on.
Yeah, great. And that's something that echoes a bit what Joy said earlier about changing behaviors, and you can't rely entirely on technology. Frank had that message
Exactly.
as well. Nick, your final thoughts, please.
Yeah, I would just say, first off, thanks again for having the panel. I really enjoyed the conversation. Again, I just kind of restate that I think LPG is a solution. I don't see another clean cooking fuel that can scale today in emerging markets that can have the SDG impacts that we're all looking for. So we should be, I think, really excited about that and really driven to have that impact. One thing to note is that a lot of customers that we've seen that actually are able to graduate to a cleaner fuel like LPG, they're still in a very precarious place. We saw during the pandemic that customers that are on our pay-as-you-go system, actually their payments went up, their consumption went up. And so as prices were increasing, this being able to buy in small amounts or in other markets being able to rely on subsidies is really important, or you're going to fall back into your previous kind of cooking behavior.
Yeah.
So you have to think about how do we come up with interventions that are also very durable, considering how the last few years have gone with lots of different types of shocks to everyone's daily lives. How do we make this solution last?
Yeah, thank you. Good point, Nick. And then Frank, as chairman of the working group of SDGs, you get the last word.
Thanks a lot, Michael. Yeah, in my closing remarks, I would like to look into how can we now proceed with the SDGs. And I think it's also something that you read quite often when you look for, okay, where are we actually in working as a global society on the SDGs, is that we should really start understanding also the interactions between goals and targets. There are 17 of them, and I think in some cases you can identify also maybe some conflicting interests if you look at the specific targets. And on the other hand, of course, we can also look into where different goals maybe reinforce each other. So in all of this, I think we need a systemic approach. And this is an approach where you maybe take a step back, and instead of looking suboptimal solutions, really look for the necessary lead for a solution that impacts the whole system in a good way. And the other thing is, I think, make sure people care about the SDGs. I still think if you look at maybe in the Netherlands, you don't hear too much about the SDGs. I think media has largely ignored them up to date. So I think what we do here today, but also what we can do as an industry, is help to promote them and see where we can actually have good impact. So maybe also use this opportunity one more time to share your impact stories with the WLPGA. So we can, of course, put them on the website and make sure that people start caring more about the SDGs.
And if we could, Bridget, if we could just put the resources slide up, it's a good point to end on, Frank, because we do have a slide that demonstrates where the impact stories are and where the different resources are. And so there you see it. And I encourage you to visit these websites. And I want to take this opportunity to thank Kanu, Joy, Nick, and Frank for their contributions. This has been a wonderful discussion. And I look forward to hopefully seeing all of you in Delhi next November, where we'll be holding LPG Week. And Bridget, if you could switch over to the LPG Week slide, then I'll tell you a little bit about what we're going to be doing between the 14th and the 18th of November in Delhi, a full week of events covering the entirety of the LPG industry at a global level. And you'll get to learn about what has happened in India, which has been an incredible program and an incredible effort to switch millions of people from cooking on biomass to cooking on LPG. Thank you so much to the panel. My name is Michael Kelly from the World LPG Association. Thank you for joining us. And let me hand over from Andre, who's going to take us on home.
Thank you, Michael. Looking forward for
Thank
the
you,
LPG
Michael.
week this year. Really looking forward. I think we all are, right? And so this wraps our session today. I dare to say that this was one of the most informative and actionable sessions we had to date. So really, really thank you, guys. I want to thank you, all of you, for being with us today, for your interest in this edition of the LPG Talks Live, and of course, in the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, but mostly of what it means, those Sustainable Development Goals. Also, a very special thank to James, Michael, Frank, Kanu, Joy, and Nick for being here with us today. In case you want to share this with your colleagues, with your families, I think this is really informative session. I'm happy to inform you that this session was recorded and it will be available for all of you to share with anyone you might want to. We are launching an exit poll, so stay tuned and provide us feedback. We always want to improve. Let us know your thoughts. Thank you, and looking forward to seeing you in the next LPG Talks Live. Stay safe, and thank you.
Thank you.
you.